how do we have retention of apprentices? Because, the recent stats said that 65% of chefs or people leave the hospitality industry in 6 years after their training. Well, that's a churn and burn we can't afford.
Dani Valent has spent quite a bit of time talking about mental health in the hospitality industry. It's an industry that's renowned for stresses and pressures. And if we didn't know that already, we've certainly learnt that over and over again over the past 18 months. I thought it was a great opportunity to speak to Rhonda Andrews. She's a principal psychologist and managing director of Barrington Centre, which is an organisational psychology and strategic consultancy HQ'd in Melbourne. Rhonda, welcome to Dirty Linen.
Thank you very much, Dani. Great to be with you.
Yeah, it's a real pleasure and an honour to have you on the show. I know you've delved a lot into the hospitality sector and particularly the mental health issues that we do see in that industry. Tell me a little bit about what you do at the Barrington Centre and how it relates to hospitality.
Yes, so what we are doing is really looking at what are the issues around mental health, particularly looking at what I call the slow burn, Dani, where it's that really cumulative impact upon people over time and just how that wears them down physically, mentally and emotionally. And then what can we do about it, not only from a reactive point of view, but also what can we do at that what I call the pointy end in the way of how can we actually help people with building their resilience and also supporting businesses and industries alike.
And what kind of role does Barrington Centre take in that?
So it's quite varied. So a lot of our work is getting the evidence and finding out what are the key issues, because they do vary according to specific sectors. As we know, as we're talking about hospitality, that has unique stressors. And so therefore for us, it's about really looking at what are the hot spots for particular industries, and then being able to look at where and how do we actually address those and when. And so are we doing it at an individual level? Are we doing it with, if you like, teams of people and their leadership, or are we doing it at a sector level? And sometimes we can actually be looking at that on a multi-pronged approach, but certainly looking at very much about a preventative front of delivery of training and programs to support individuals, teams and sectors.
It's so interesting to hear about this sort of evidence-based approach to looking at mental health in hospitality. It's, I think so often when mental health and hospitality intersect, it's so often in a picking up the pieces kind of way. It's less strategic, if you will.
Absolutely, and I hear it all the time. And you see statements and hear statements of, it's like going to war every day, so just in a sense push on. And whereas what we're trying to do is say no. In fact, let's pull back from that sort of attitude and rather say, okay, what have we got that's happening, and how do we measure the change so people can actually see in which ways and how it can help them from a strategic perspective as well as a very practical way at an individual level.
I mean, I'd love to get on to the particular challenges and the ways that we can increase resilience and heal in hospitality. But I'd just love to ask firstly about the method that you use, or the methods you use to go about researching this. Are you sort of, in kitchens with clipboards?
If only. Although I must say, I just said to the staff as I was coming on that we've just had a lovely lunch in Melbourne at one of the restaurants, and I told them that I was coming on, and they were absolutely fascinated that I was joining you, Dani. And so they all crowded round and they gave me a full-on, well, these are the issues that you need to share with Dani today. So it was really good to hear that anecdotal evidence. And I think if I could start there and say that I think we've got a real dichotomy happening in Australia right now. We've got hospitality that's in a world of pain, that's trying to attract enough staff. But the dichotomy is equally we've got staff who are really living in a hand-to-mouth existence. And so, it's sort of like chalk and cheese, desperate at both levels. And in answer to your question, Dani, the way in which we glean a lot of this information is through the colleges, so through the training colleges, certainly through business owners, certainly through key associations in the hospitality industry that we work with. And then we actually go in and certainly in particular businesses and people who are participating in our programs, we actually measure some of the key things like their cumulative stress, their trauma, the levels of resilience, and what sort of coping mechanisms do they have. And so that's where we actually get quite a lot of our data and our evidence to actually find out what are the hot spots that are for front of house staff and back of house, kitchen staff.
Well, let's get into the nitty-gritty then. What kinds of things do you see?
Yeah, well, could I start? Certainly. I think we need to acknowledge that we've got a quadruple whammy going on at the moment. In this industry, what's happening because of our closed borders, we have missing workers, we have missing international students and tourists, we have missing business events, and we have missing working holiday makers. And so with that sort of background, with the COVID crisis that we have, certainly the themes that I'm hearing are very much in a multi-dimensional way, Dani. And we really need to look at them because they're all interrelated. And so some are really obvious, but I think we've got to start with some really poignant statistics. And that is when we look at that 65% of our young people in Australia find their first job in hospitality or leisure or retail, it actually means that their experiences in the world of work, when I talk about behaviours, attitudes, coping mechanisms, just leadership, how they see places work, turn into lifelong habits. So we've got that as a backdrop, as well as when we look at that hospitality along with tourism provides up to 1 in 11 employment opportunities globally. And so, we've got a big pool of people here that we are, if you like, putting through experiences within hospitality. And so within that, I see that the themes that I see in the wellbeing space are around the physical, and it's no surprise because of just the hours that people are working. And it is, as someone said, it's a perfect storm that undermines mental health because, you have unsociable hours that lead to potentially work-family conflict. And, you've got a fast-paced environment and very long hours. So it really impacts upon the physical state of people in their sleeping, their eating, their financial, just the occupation that they've chosen. There's certainly their social aspect. So, just getting together with family and friends becomes a logistical nightmare. And then you've got the psychological overlay there, which is all around that perfectionism, which is quite a trait in the hospitality industry, particularly in the chefs. And so you've got this anxiety, potential depression, and that question around the self. And so, self-belief, self-confidence. And so that becomes the perfect storm, if you like, Dani, for what I'm seeing now.
It is a perfect storm. But, even as you outline all those really quite terrible things, I know that people will be listening to you and feeling relieved to have this sort of overlay of circumstances recognised. And yeah, I think once you recognise something, that is at least a part way along the path to solving it.
Yeah, and I think you're so right there, because often we think, this is just happening to me, or am I exaggerating this? Is this something that I just need to push to one side, just get on with it, and sort of try and talk yourself out of it. But I think exactly as you just said then, Dani, it is about recognising, hey, it's not just me. This is something that's happening beyond me and within the industry because of, COVID and the secondary and tertiary consequences that we've got, as I said, with our borders closed and what that means around supply and demand.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so what else?
So I think could we drill down a little, because what does all this mean? What are the issues? And when we've been talking to individuals within the industry, talking to owners of businesses, talking to peak bodies within the industry, I guess, certainly I see six main areas, six issues, main categories. Firstly, I think there's the physical one, Dani, and that is there are a lot of workplace injuries and there's pressure to work potentially while still recovering from injury. We do know about the high degree of fatigue, and that's caused by those demanding hours and just changes to your sleep pattern, and then trying to juggle what might be required from a family and a friendship perspective. So we've got that as one issue. The other that's a really big one that I want to put on the table today is about gender. We do have a real imbalance, and it is about the work. It's caused by the work hours. In some cases, it is about the underpayment, and in other cases, it is about what happens culturally within a workplace. And I want to bring the white elephant out and say, there are times when there is harassment and bullying, and so what does that do about encouraging people to join this particular sector?
I was out for dinner last night with two 15-year-olds, and both girls, and one of them has her first job, just as you said before. She's one of those many people whose first job is in hospitality. She's working in a fish and chip shop, and she said that frequently she's asked by male customers, does she have a boyfriend? What's she doing after work? She's 15. Yeah. She has a not very nice boss, as she described, and so there's a lot of pressure on her to be, that ever smiling face for the customers. So she's always has to be friendly. She's got that pressure from her boss. And so a male customer asked her over to his table. She goes over, perhaps he needs some extra salt, whatever it is. But he asks her, does she have a boyfriend? It's like, this is not okay.
Yeah, exactly. And and that isn't, unfortunately, a one-off. I hear that regularly where, here she is, as you say, 15-year-old, new first job, and those intrusive questions by a customer it isn't okay. And so part of what we do is say, okay, how do you actually manage those circumstances where people do cross boundaries, whether it be customers or whether it be colleagues, whoever it may be in your workplace, because at some level it's very interesting, isn't it? In hospitality there's that familiarisation that people accept and at some level expect that they can have a informal chat with whoever's serving them, and at sometimes is exactly what you found last night, that people cross that boundary, and where does that leave the worker who is trying to still engage, still be positive, but not feel uncomfortable in their workplace? Because as you and I both know, every person has the right to feel comfortable and safe in their workplace. And how do we create that in a hospitality industry where some people's behaviour is totally unacceptable and unpredictable? But I think, the two women that you went out with last night, they typify for me what we see, and I'll give it its fairly harsh term about fear, that they're often reluctant and very hesitant to share those experiences or say what's going on because they feel like, well, they're dime a dozen. They'll lose their job. Someone else will pick it up instead. And so it is that hesitancy of just swallow it, suck it up, just move on. But I think it's really important that we speak about this and put it on the table for discussion and say that's not okay. Whether you're a male or a female, it's not okay to feel uncomfortable through a course of conversation, either from the customer or a colleague. And I think that fear factor, whether you put it in a party frock and it looks like anxiety, I don't care. But the point is there's an underlying hesitancy and reluctance to feel like you have the right to speak.
Absolutely. And I'd say, you could add race to that as well, or, other ways that people can be marginalised. I think people with a disability, there would be similar things but in whatever way people need to feel comfortable and supported. Sometimes those structures and frameworks and clear pathways to, saying that you require support or backup, they're just sometimes not there.
And you're very right there. And as you say, yes, I've used just one dimension, but there's multiple dimensions there, as you say, whether that be cultural, whether that be particular affiliations, whatever it might be, there is a potential discrimination or a potential discomfort because of that lack of inclusion and diversity.
Yep, absolutely. All right. Was that number 3?
Yeah, that was number 3. Oh, you're doing well in your counting here. The one I want to talk about is, and this is, of course, something that anyone in the hospitality industry experiences, and that's the whole issue around socialisation. And, I look at just the style of induction and what I call socialisation of newcomers into a business and into the hospitality. And, often they report that it's done very poorly. And so therefore it takes a long while for them to be feeling they belong or feeling like they understand the ropes. It'd be fascinating to ask the 15-year-old from last night's dinner, how has she been inducted? And what's been the way in which she's feeling like she understands the protocols, understands how to do things pertaining to that business, and how much do they actually feel included with others, so they feel like they've got their back supported by another colleague. And so that socialisation is known but not talked about a lot. And people talk about the work hours, which adds to the isolation. But I think we've also got to say, Dani, people can feel really isolated at work. Even though they're frantic, they're busy as hell, they can still feel very isolated in the workplace. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, I've got so many thoughts going through my mind. One of them is I can tell you how the 15-year-old felt like she was inducted, and that was that she was screamed at on her first day for making a mistake. So it wasn't too great. But I can also mention a positive story, which is that I was chatting to Sam and Luke Burke today. They're Aboriginal chefs who've come through the National Indigenous Culinary Institute, and they're working at restaurants in Sydney. And they talked about their leadership role in the Aboriginal community, where they had, attained positions of leadership in their respective restaurants, and they had Indigenous young chefs who were working under them. And they talked about how important it was to them to give those young people the mentorship and support and, show them the ropes in a way that someone, that wasn't there for them in the same way. So I guess, you can see it is done in some ways in a good way, whether it's formally or informally, but of course there are lots of instances where it's not done well.
Yeah, and you're quite right. We need to show a perspective here of balance. And likewise, I've seen some very good and very effective ways of inducting newcomers and newbies, if you like, into the industry. And some really practical things like buddy systems, so that, when people are on roster together, there's an experienced person with a less experienced person front of house. And so there's a go-to person all the time. Same in the back of house. And so, it can be, as you said, formal or informal, but in some cases they formalise that. So they deliberately roster them on together. So there's that sense of a confidence, sense of strength, sense of observing, and just knowing if there's any issue, there's a go-to person that they have as their backup. And, I think those sorts of mechanisms from if you like, a cultural perspective as well as a structural perspective, really give newcomers a great opportunity to rise quickly, to really feel they've got the confidence and be able to deliver on whatever part of the service in hospitality their role is.
Yep. All right. What's number 5?
Okay, so number 5 is really about what I call, as I said earlier, the slow burn. So they're what I call the repeated stressors. So where we've got things that are happening on a day-to-day basis. So that's a combination, if you like. I call it like the Velcro pit. So everything gets stuck to it. And so that could be things that are happening about your fatigue, about the lack of socialisation, so being isolated from your friends and not being able to catch up as often, and then feeling alone, and then that sort of cocktail, if you like, of how do you keep motivated, how do you keep alert, and that might introduce things like drugs and alcohol. And then we've got, if you like, the cycle of mental health. And in that, we then have some really long-term issues that become compounding. And so it's a bit like, how do you peel an onion? How do you peel it back again to find out where's the cause of all of these issues? And so that, for me, is when it becomes complex, compounding, and people just don't know where do they start to fix this from a emotional or psychological perspective.
And that's where you get to that picking up the pieces end of things.
That's right. You're really at the end of the line, and it's it's that whole thing of people on a continuum of really wondering, is this industry for me? Do I want to be here? Is this something that I want to pursue? Is this my long-term, or is this just a short-term financial stopgap? And so people start to question their relationship with the sector, and that has its own effect on how people are actually dealing and engaging. So then it comes back to, how committed are they? How do they come across, whether front of house or back of house? How do they come across with their own energy, with their own interest? And so it really has that knock-on effect, which then people can feel at times, and once again, a white elephant in the room, feel at times that they're despondent. Does anyone else understand how bad it is, and where do I go for help?
Yeah, and I think I've certainly heard of and talked to and encountered so many people that have taken the COVID pause. Well, they've gone and done something else, because I think they haven't been able to see how they could return to the industry, return to work in such a way that, improves things and takes them out of that cycle of stress that you talk about.
Yeah, and I think what's overlaying that is, that we've had a lot of people disappear from this mobile workforce because, understandably, financially, they've been forced to find stable work elsewhere. So this is where we've got this whole thing of a skill and a staff shortage, as well as those who have got jobs in hospitality are currently looking around the states and territories of Australia and saying, when's our next lockdown? And so, what does that mean about being laid off again? How am I going to pay the rent? And so it becomes that, as the staff said to me today at the hotel for lunch, they said, it's a bit like I've got this thing sitting on my shoulder all the time. It's the COVID worry about, come into a state, come into a territory, bang, we're into shutdown, we're into lockdown, I'm stood down. And what does that mean about my electricity bill that I've got due at the end of the week? And so for them, it's that sense of anxiety that's there, as they said at lunchtime today, all the time. That's, if you like, eating away at them in their mind.
Yeah, I mean, what can you? I don't know. I know we're going to get to solutions. I'm not sure what the solution is to that, except, like community-wide vaccination.
Yeah.
And that's a big one that we probably can't tackle today.
No, it'd be nice if we could.
It would be nice if we could.
I'd be a real encourager of that. So could I just finish the sixth one, because this one, I think, is something that's really pertaining to the hospitality, and this is where it's both the asset of the industry as well as what I'd call the Achilles heel, and that is the industry. Hospitality industry really attracts perfectionists. And they love their work, they're passionate about their work, they demand from themselves and from others just the best. And that's an absolute credit. And we see that in the delivery, from the chefs through to the front of house, just the way in which it becomes a massive experience in any workplace and in any business in hospitality. But the Achilles heel of that is when the perfectionist loves control. And so when we've got a situation like we have now, and we've had in 2020, this year, and possibly moving forward into other years, that there is a sense of loss of control. There's a health issue out there that we have no control over in the way of, as an individual, about how it's going to impact upon my job on a day-to-day basis and my employment. And so the perfectionist really absolutely spikes in anxiety and depression because of that, because it's that sense of helplessness. I can do the best I can, but if I'm actually not at work because we can't open the doors, then how am I actually going to live? And so that personality style that is attracted to the industry, and when I look at our statistics, we've got a skewed percentage of perfectionists within hospitality, much more than any other industry. And so that in turn means that there is a heightened risk and a heightened sense of anxiety and mental health issues because of that situation.
That really makes sense. It makes me think of someone we had on the podcast a month or so ago, Rhonda. Her name's Lucy Whitlow, and she's a pastry chef at Osteria Ilaria in the city. But when she was in lockdown, in the first lockdown, well, I think the long lockdown, she was living alone in a converted church. It sounds like quite an extraordinary place to be living. But she, I don't know if she would describe herself as a perfectionist, but she certainly, works in great detail, and she's, just creates incredible desserts, but she used it as an opportunity to really focus in on her cheese making and also art creation. And she did drawings, she made cheese, she staged art openings just for herself, and she put on her fur coat to attend her own art openings. And I just think, she's one person that seemed to, from our conversation, to find other outlets for her high achieving, perhaps perfectionism, but just certainly her desire to continue working and creating. But yeah, not everyone is able to do an art opening in a church.
But how creative is that?
It's so amazing. She's incredible.
I mean, my hat, I just applaud her because, what she's recognised is I want to keep that motivation, that passion going. Yes, I won't have an audience apart from myself, but I can actually honour my own skills.
Exactly. Yeah.
No, absolute credit to her. We should have put her on video and had a virtual celebration.
Totally. Absolutely. Okay, so we've identified our 6 stresses and challenges. What next? What can we do to help people?
Yeah, and I think when I look at this, it'd be lovely to have a magic wand, and it'd be lovely to be able to say, there's a simple solution here. But it is a complex one, and I think we need to recognise that. And so when I'm speaking to, whether it's individuals or business owners or whoever it may be, policymakers, if I look at where does this all come from, what's central to this issue? Yes, we've got a COVID overlay, but that actually isn't our issue. Our issue really, for me, in my view, is the core and central to all of this is skills shortages. Because for me, that's what we're really trying to address here, because anything around mental health and wellbeing policies are absolutely amplified to this, what I call that pre-existing condition of skill shortages. And so, I parallel it because Barrington also works in the aged care sector, and I parallel a similar situation about the mobility of the workforce, the issues, the same issues around skill shortages. And there is, if you like, a real similarity and also a complexity around it. And so when I look at hospitality, I see, if you like, the occupational issues and the structural issues that sit underneath those skill shortages. And so when you ask, okay, well, what do we do about this? The way we are approaching it is, as a solution, we're really doing it from 3 tiers. So the first one is very much at the individual level. And so that is, how is the individual coping or not coping, as the case may be, and building on the strengths that they already have. So not doing a gap analysis of saying, hey, you're not coping here, there and everywhere. People don't need to hear that all the time. They feel like they're just being flogged. But go from a point of what is it that works for you, and let's build that up, because then that's going to actually then be able to reduce the things we don't want, like the negative stress, the anxiety, the burnout, all of those things. So what we're doing there, Dani, is really looking from a beliefs perspective, someone's own values, making that the driver, and then looking at the practical things around their physical, mental and emotional well-being that they have total control in. No, nothing else, just what they have control in, so then they can actually make decisions and choices and actions based just on what they have 100% control in. And for some people, that may not be many parts of their life, but we just hone in on those, and that's what they spend their time in being able to examine, be able to change and be able to grow. So that's at the individual level.
Well, I'm just what's an example?
So, for instance, it may be as basic as what is it that, so I've got my job, so on a day-to-day basis, it can be a decision around, so how am I going to actually run my life? What does my day look like? And so instead of, for instance, sitting and vegging in front of the telly until my shift starts at 3 p.m. this afternoon, I might go for a walk instead.
Right. Yeah.
So it really becomes very at that minutiae level of what is it that I can put in my day that makes me feel better. Doesn't have a cost associated with it. It's just me driving it. It could be, having a shower morning and night is something that makes me feel good. And so I'm going to make that happen. Making a call to a family friend or a friend, someone who is in my close connections, I'm going to make a pact with myself that I'm actually going to call one a day. So once again, what it's doing is very small steps, Dani, but it's about building resilience and building a buffer against those issues that I spoke about.
Mm-hmm. Love it. Okay.
So that's really at a very pragmatic, very small steps. But if you look at it, if people start doing that on a day-to-day basis or week-to-week basis, it can really change, just how you feel physically, how you feel mentally, and how you feel emotionally. Because A, you're connecting. B, you're starting to get physically out there, and you're getting away from things that we do know are very passive, and leave people a lot of time to ruminate, to think about things and get into a negative spiral.
Yep, makes sense.
And if we look at our evidence, we've got evidence over the past 10 years now from a longitudinal study that the greatest factor we want to concentrate on is connection, because it shows in our research that without connection, there's a risk, an 85% risk of some form of mental health issue, whether that's post-traumatic stress, whether that's depression, something in that vein. That is an 85% risk when people are isolated.
So do you tackle that sort of from an organisational point of view?
We tackle it at three levels, individual and the business, and then more at a system or sector level. Okay.
So, what do you want to tell me next?
Okay, so if we look at the team or a business, really for us, it's around looking at what's happening with the culture, what's happening with leadership, and what's happening with the team values. Because, as you were sharing that experience of the 15-year-old, and equally you and I could share a positive experience, what I really enjoy when I hear people say, I love my job, I love where I work. And when I ask them, so what's the best thing about it? Oh, the people. Without a doubt. It's the first thing. Yep. First thing that comes into 99% of them. They go, it's the people. And I'm thinking, wow, so sounds simple, but how do we actually build that? And that's that real sense of belonging, that real sense of team value, and that real sense of being acknowledged for what you're doing. And even if you muck up, what's the learning out of that and how do you do it differently? So for me, it's certainly around looking at how does that either give inclusion or how does that drive people away and make them feel absolutely grotty about themselves and disappointed about themselves, or just want to run away from it.
So can you give me any examples of things that you've seen businesses do really well in this space?
Yes, I can. And so certainly a number of them have it when they do their changeover of roster, that they have a 5-minute to 10-minute little discussion with the team. And so they generally have some food or some drink at that time, so everyone's just munching. And it could be just in the kitchen, It could be somewhere outside, not where the patrons are, or, you know, in that case I'm talking about a restaurant, but I've seen it happen in other food services situations where they have a stand-up team meeting, as you could call it, and it's really just, what's happened to you today, Dani? How are things happening today? So it's a connection in with, how's today going for you? How do you feel? Anything you want to discuss, anything you want to actually say, and they just go around. It could be like, you know, 30 seconds for each person. Oh, well, you know, I've just had my child throw up on me just before I came, you know. So, you know, it can be anything. And it can be laughing, you know, so it can be something funny, something about the dog, what the dog's done, you know, or it can be anything that's happening, but it's about people's lives. So you're bringing that into the team meeting or the little let's catch up, let's bond, let's actually just have a quick chat, and then people actually feel connected, and then they go about their day or their roster. And I've seen that absolutely lift people in their energy levels, certainly in their sense of belonging and their sense of pride in what they're doing, because they feel valued, and so therefore they want to value what they do.
Yeah, it's interesting that these small changes, you know, a shower or a short chat can really make a big difference.
Yep, and other things that I've seen, which is more on the run, you know, of more senior people within a business, just recognising what people are doing. That's looking good, Dani. You know, that was a great way in which you spoke to X. So there's that positive reinforcement, informally, on the fly, not in a sense of being staged, but very reactive and very genuine. And that just lifts people because, hey, there's recognition. You know, we can all yell at someone when they don't do a good job, or they stuff up something, or, you know, they've given the wrong orders to someone, or, you know, they've delivered to the wrong box to someone. But it is about just those small things that are done, and then there's a recognition by someone who is valued in the business, who is just acknowledging that. And for me, once again, that's all around culture, that's all around leadership, and that's also about the team value.
I think, you know, so many hospitality businesses are extra stressed and pressured at the moment. As you've identified, you know, there is such a personnel shortage that the people who are in the business are often, you know, if they're the owner, perhaps they're working ridiculous hours. There's, you know, people aren't able to take time off, or it's hard for them to do so. And I think it's so easy to let those little 1%ers go. But I think what you've identified is that doing them makes such a big positive difference, and not doing them really drags people down. And in the end, it actually probably, you know, takes more of a toll, because you might have someone who leaves or can't come to work, or, you know, leaves the industry altogether. So it's same with training, isn't it? And I've heard from a lot of people at the moment, you know, they don't have time to show anyone how to do anything. They need to simplify the menu, or, you know, not do a certain dish because it takes too long. But I think nurturing people in that sense of continually learning and supporting them really can pay off in the long run.
Absolutely. And, you know, we're running a program called Systems of Support, which is exactly that. It's looking at, you know, how do you do that 1%er? And it's a minute here, it's a minute there. And yes, I appreciate it's a stressful environment, particularly for business owners at the moment, and they just feel like my head's just absolutely pounding with so much stuff going on. But the cost, not only financial cost, but time-wise of attrition just becomes that revolving door. And so it becomes, you know, that whole thing of, if I can just have it as part of my mantra of the way in which I'm engaging, then it's a bit like, you know, how I'd like to be treated is how I treat the staff. And it is about just recognising that, line as you're talking, a bit of a laugh here, a bit of a laugh there, absolutely pays off in spades, because it is the main thing when you ask people, as I said, people is what keeps people in their jobs, because they have a sense of belonging and they are valued. And really, at the end of the day, yes, people can talk about the dollars, their remuneration, but when you look at the statistics and the research, that actually isn't the driver for most people. It is about that sense of value. And so for us, that's what we really encourage and build into just the way in which businesses are able to operate when there are very legitimate stressors that are just pounding them day in, day out, and particularly in a very uncertain world as we have with COVID.
So, Rhonda, I just to flip it slightly, what do you think customers can do to improve or, just make someone's day better when they're visiting a hospitality establishment?
Yeah, I think that's a really good one, and I've seen a couple of, quite a few places, both in Melbourne and Brisbane, have got nice signs up now with a big smiley face and saying, "You think you're doing it tough? So are we." And so all of a sudden, everyone starts laughing. So rather than have, those very serious comments of, do not give our staff a hard time, do not be abusive, whilst I fully accept that's very important, there's a way in which you can give the same message in a light-hearted way. And so I think some drawings, I've seen people actually ask some preschoolers and some grade 1s and grade 2s to draw some pictures, and it's saying these are our staff trying to get on with their job and trying to enjoy their day. You can make it better, or you can add to this. And so people are doing quite inventive things like that. Others I've seen are getting butcher's paper onto the walls, so actually customers can write on it, and customers can write something as a thank you to the staff. So I think
nice.
Yeah, it's great.
It's a great idea.
So I think from the customer's point of view, just remember that as you walk in the door, wherever it may be of any hospitality, that, people are doing their best under really difficult circumstances, and you can make or break their day. And so a smile, how are you, goes a long way. How's your day goes a long way. I just did it down at this hotel at lunchtime. I said, "So how are you all?" Well, they just didn't give me okay, thanks. Blur. They gave it to me, and it was lovely. And then they started laughing, and then they went off, to attend to a whole lot of other customers. But, it is about checking in. The customer can check in with the individual. They are a person who has a family or has loved ones, and so therefore it is treating them as you would treat your own family member.
Yeah, I love it. Rhonda, I feel like we could talk for hours, but we better not. Is there something that you'd like to leave us with?
Could I just talk about the third tier of solutions? Because for me, this is the bigger one, and I guess the gnarlier one, but needs, I think, to be looked at. And it comes back to my comment about the central problem being skill shortages. And for me, Dani, this is at what I call the industry level, and this includes at a federal level, the sector peak bodies and policy makers. And we really do need, and this is what Barrington's getting involved in, a multi-intervention approach. And so, for me, it's changing the attitudes, even right down to the teachers in the colleges. How do we have retention of apprentices? Because the recent stats said that 65% of chefs or people leave the hospitality industry in 6 years after their training. Well, that's a churn and burn we can't afford. And so it's having a look at that. It's having a look at the working conditions. It's having a look at what I call the low entry barrier to work in the industry. And this is where my parallel with aged care comes in, because what happens is with low entry barriers, in comparison to, say, like industries of travel agents, car dealerships or accountants, they all require accreditation to enter into a business, but not in hospitality. So with not that accountability and, if you like, the informal economy, it really saturates the market. And we create a situation where there is much more supply than demand. And so that then has the knock-on effect that employment consequences are that businesses can't offer full-time roles, so people can't gain consistent and reliable employment in hospitality. And so it has that knock-on effect. And so for me, they're the things that I think you, me, others can actually have quite an influence at that industry level as a collective, not as individual voices, but as a collective to start dealing with that, because I think that's our nutty problem. That's our, the nut at the core of this. And if we can start to look at that, I think we'll have a better effect on the things that we've spoken about today. And of course, the one dear to my heart is very much about mental health and wellbeing.
I just love the way that you've joined the dots. It's just crucial. It's, as somebody's personal situation, like it's never just going to be one thing. It's the compounding stressors, or it's, it's the various things that sort of link together in somebody's life. It's definitely like that with the industry. I haven't really heard the dots joined so clearly in terms of the mental health implications of some of these structural problems. I mean, I would sort of add, and we've talked about the responsibility of diners, I would sort of put at the other end of that is pricing. And, I don't want to open a whole other can of worms, but I think it's definitely, when you think about the value chain of hospitality, I think the price that people are willing to pay is a really big part of that conversation. And when you think about the way that the can sort of kicked down the road, I think one of the implications of that cost shifting is onto the mental health of the people that work in the industry. Yeah,
I totally agree with you. And as you said, it can be opening up a can of worms, but I think that is about what is the market going to accept, and how can we actually lift that? Because I think the customer will rise with that. It has to come from the sector to set that bar.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
Because as you rightly said, the secondary and tertiary consequences of all of that are, well, if you go for a low bar, then everything else is a low bar. And so then it's once again, comes back to values, what's the value we're placing on that worth of the individual and that worth of this industry?
Yeah. Yeah. It's just, it's that there's so many meanings or interpretations of that word value. And I think you've really got me thinking about, I'm going to look at it from all kinds of different angles. Rhonda, look, we're well out of time, but it's been so incredible to hear about the great work you're doing at Barrington Centre. It's, it's real change-making stuff. So thanks so much for what you're bringing to the industry, and I appreciate you sharing it with the audience today.
Thank you very much, Dani. And I'd like to say that we feel very privileged to partner with the industry, and we're hoping that the work that we're doing does make a difference for the individual and for businesses and collectively in the sector. So thank you for the time. It's been great to speak to you today.
Likewise. Take care.
Thank you.
This is Dirty Linen, and I'm Dani Valent. We air the issues that the hospitality industry finds hard to talk about, hearing from different people with unique perspectives. We want to hear from you as well. If you have something that needs to be said about a topic, get in touch so we can include your perspective. Contact us at dirtyLinen@deepintheweeds.com.au or hit us up on Insta at Dirty Linen Podcast. We can't wait to hear from you.